Hannah Truelove was 16 years old when she didn't come home one night. As the police investigated her disappearance, many wondered if the clues to what happened lay in her vague tweets in the weeks before. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Welcome to the last installment of this year's 12 Days of Crimelines. I do have one more episode coming out this month. It's our usual Wednesday release. And then I also have 2 bonus episodes for Patreon supporters and Apple subscribers. So it's the last technical episode of the series, but we're just going to keep going. I am going to take the first 2 weeks off in January to get set up for the rest of the year, get some of the behind-the-scenes housekeeping type stuff done for the podcast. But I do want to take some time to do a Q&A episode during my break, and I have 2 or 3 case updates as well to go over. So if you have any questions for me about podcasting, cases I've covered, me as a person, whatever, just feel free to email them to crimelinespodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's crimelinespodcast@gmail.com. I'll also post it on my social media to get comments there as well. But we're not really up to the point where I'm taking a break just yet. We are going to cover today an unsolved case with major thanks to Haley Gray for her research assistance. So let's get started with Hannah Truelove, who was born in May of 1996. She was her mother Mona's only child, but she did have 2 siblings through her father, Jeff. When Hannah was about 7, her parents split up, and she lived primarily with Mona, though she spent a lot of time with her father. He had an auto body shop, and she loved helping him out, learning the names of all of the tools at a young age. Hannah was a gentle spirit. She was smart, unique, and a little shy, but she did have a tight group of friends. She was considered one of the good kids at school, respectful and fun to have around. The only issue was that in high school, she started missing class. It was frequent enough that it rose to the level of truancy, and the Division of Family and Children's Services did have an open case as Hannah was identified as being at risk. It wasn't just due to the truancy issues, but also because Mona had been cited for drunk driving. Early in the summer of 2012, Hannah tweeted about wanting to be at the lake and hashtagged it homesick. So she was spending some time away from the Gainesville, Georgia apartment she shared with Mona. Mona lived at the Lake Lanier Club Apartments, which was a gated complex. There was a wooded area behind the apartments that led to the lake, and there were a couple unofficial walking trails back there. And yes, this Lake Lanier is the same one that often makes the news as being cursed or being the deadliest lake, with a lot of urban legends about the lake. Hannah did move back with her mom in July of 2012, and then she started school up again in August. She was in her 11th grade year at Gainesville High School. Being 16, Hannah was eager to start driving herself to and from school, but she didn't have her license yet. She was still learning. Her father, Jeff, said she didn't like riding the bus, possibly because of the other kids, and that contributed to some degree to her reluctance to go to school. But Hannah also wanted to be able to drive for the freedom of movement. Her mother often worked until 7 or 8 at night, so Hannah couldn't really go anywhere after school. None of her friends had cars either, so they would just hang out at the apartment complex. Hannah was hopeful her 11th grade year would go well. She had dreams of being a veterinarian, which meant she had to make sure she did well in high school to get into the university of her choice. But she also had other aspirations. She was nearly 6 feet tall at 16 and had a lean build, so she also considered going into modeling. On August 20th, 2012, Hannah's dad, Jeff, gave her $300 and dropped her off at the outlet mall to buy some new clothes for the school year. He picked her up and took her out to dinner before dropping her off at her mom's apartment around 7 p.m. Everything seemed normal with Hannah, and she didn't express any concerns. A few days later, on Thursday, August 23rd, Hannah took the bus to school as usual. A social worker met with her that day at Gainesville High. Apparently, they had tried to go by the apartment a couple of days before, but Hannah wasn't home, and Mona didn't know where she was, so this was just the easiest way for the caseworker to touch base with her. Hannah reported that things were going well. She said her mother hadn't been drinking, and Hannah didn't confide any concerns about anything with the social worker. She acted the way she always did, according to the DFCS report. The two did discuss how Hannah could get back on track with her math requirements for graduation, and the worker left with no concerns to report. After school, Hannah went home, dropped her things off in a room, and was seen hanging out at the picnic tables in a shared green space in the apartment complex. There were other teens around, some boys playing football, others sitting around and talking. There were also other people from the apartment complex, like young families outside letting the kids play. It was a really nice day, and this was a pretty typical thing for Hannah and the other people in the apartment complex to do on a Thursday afternoon. She was seen in this area as late as 7:30. Mona usually got home by 8 p.m., and when she got home that night, she went into the apartment, but Hannah wasn't there. Mona knew that Hannah had made it home after school because she had collected the mail and thrown it on the couch. Mona assumed Hannah must be out with friends like she usually was, and she expected her home before dark. Mona laid down and dozed off, thinking Hannah was going to walk in any second. But when she woke up around 9 p.m., she realized Hannah was still out. That's when Mona called Hannah's dad, Jeff, to check and see if maybe Hannah was with him. Jeff said she wasn't. He had gone by the apartment earlier to see if Hannah wanted to grab dinner with him, but she wasn't home, so he had moved on with his evening. Mona waited a little longer, calling Hannah's friends to see if she was there, and she really just expected Hannah to walk in the door. But at 10:15, with it fully dark out, she was worried enough to call 911 and report Hannah missing. She told the dispatcher that Hannah did go out without always leaving a note about where she was, but she never stayed out after dark. After speaking with the police, Mona called Jeff to let him know that she had reported Hannah missing. Mona was worried, but according to Jeff, her initial thinking was that Hannah had run away and was staying with a friend. There had been tension in the home between Hannah and Mona, and Hannah was pretty upset that Mona wouldn't let her have a cell phone. It seems like Hannah may have had one at some point, and then Mona took it away as a punishment. She was resistant in letting Hannah get a new phone, even though Jeff, her father, wanted her to have one. He was worried about Hannah being home alone after school without a phone since they didn't have a landline, and Mona would take her own cell phone with her to work. The phone situation was in the negotiation stage, but as parent-teenager negotiations sometimes go, it wasn't exactly as peaceful as anyone would have hoped. Jeff, however, did not think Hannah ran away because it wasn't like her to do that, but even if she did, he knew she couldn't have gotten far. She didn't have friends with cars, so if she was staying with someone, it was probably someone in the apartment complex or within walking distance. Jeff and Mona spoke pretty much every hour in those overnight hours, with the update always being the same. Neither of them had heard from Hannah. Even though Hannah did have a history of skipping school and going out without Mona knowing where she was, the police did take this seriously. They went out to the apartment complex that night, walking around and calling Hannah's name. When they got no response, they went to the apartments of her friends, waking them up to see if Hannah was with them. No one had seen her since she was hanging out at the picnic tables earlier that evening. Unfortunately, the complex did not have any cameras in that area, so they could not see when she left. The following morning, Friday, August 24th, Hannah did not show up for school. The police went to the high school to talk to her friends and classmates, but no one had any information on her whereabouts. At 7:30 that evening, about 24 hours after Hannah was last seen, a man who was visiting family at the complex was taking a walk in the wooded area behind the apartments. Though there were some carved-out paths, he was actually just walking through the trees. As he walked along a ravine, he looked to the left down the hill and thought he saw a mannequin. I know it's a trope in true crime that it's never a mannequin, but I always find it interesting that this happens again and again. The human brain, seeing a dead body outside of expected context, like at a funeral, just can't process it. It's like it goes to the safe answer, even though it makes very little sense for a mannequin to be down the ravine. The man approached and recognized that this was a human body. He knew who this was because he had seen a report about Hannah being missing. Though Hannah's body was found just 100 yards from her Gainesville apartment, the city line ran through those woods. Her body was technically on the other side of city limits, so the case was eventually handed over to the Hall County Sheriff's Office. Hannah had died of multiple stab wounds. This information was initially withheld from the public. It's believed she was killed where she was found, as there were no drag marks or disturbed ground to make it look like she was pulled or pushed to that spot. Unfortunately for this case, the night Hannah went missing, it rained hard. This ravine that was usually dry had a creek running through it, and Hannah's body was submerged in the moving water for several hours. The investigators have said this doesn't mean all of the evidence was gone, but a lot of it was. In stabbings, the attacker will often cut themselves and leave their blood behind at the scene. But due to these conditions, even Hannah's blood had been washed away. The area where she was found was a secluded spot, but not isolated. You could see a bit of the balconies from the apartment complex from that spot, and the people who lived there regularly walked their dogs or headed to the lake through that area. It was not somewhere where her body would have stayed hidden for long, and it seems fortunate for the killer that no witnesses happened on by. Additionally, no one reported hearing Hannah scream. Hannah was either quiet as she was forced into the woods, or the more likely scenario, Hannah went into the woods willingly with her killer. And she would have done that if it was someone known to her. Since this crime seemed to begin and end at the apartment complex, the investigators really focused their search there with a search of all of the dumpsters and a broader search of the woods. None of the evidence that has been found has been made public. As the investigators were talking to Hannah's friends, they started hearing a number of rumors. One was that Hannah had a cell phone, a secret one that her mom didn't know about. Finding that and getting records from it, if it existed, might tell them who Hannah was hanging out with that night, or at least who she was in regular contact with. Unfortunately, it seems like this may have truly been just a rumor. There is a tweet from her Twitter account not quite 2 weeks before she died saying she was hopefully getting a new phone and she wondered which one she should get. But that could just be because she thought she was wearing Mona down. And really, that's the other reason I don't think she had a secret phone. Hannah wouldn't have been pushing or arguing for a cell phone quite so hard if she already had one. Another reason I lean towards Hannah not having a phone is that she used her Nintendo DS PictoChat to talk to friends. If she had a cell phone, she would use that since the DS chat capabilities are quite limited and they're restricted to Wi-Fi use only. The police said that they did follow up on this tip and they could not find any trace of a secret phone that Hannah had. But the investigators were able to get into her Nintendo DS and check her messages there. Any clues they got on that DS have not been made public. Other rumors the police heard were about Hannah having issues with someone. Jeff mentioned that Hannah would skip school at times just to avoid riding the bus, and that was a huge part of why she wanted to be able to drive. Hannah herself made a tweet about having a stalker less than 2 weeks before she was killed, tweeting, quote, "I got me an ugly-ass stalker." The police weren't entirely sure what Hannah meant at 16 when she said she had a stalker. She may not have meant an actual stalker, but rather someone she didn't like who kept trying to talk to her, someone who kept commenting or liking her posts on social media, or maybe it was just someone she thought was poking their nose in her business. There are other tweets from that summer that indicate Hannah was dealing with a heartbreak. There were a lot of vague tweets about missing someone, but they're also mixed in with a lot of song lyrics. So when you're reading it, it may come across as more dramatic than it was if you don't realize just how many of her tweets were simply song lyrics. Hannah loved music and had an amazing singing voice, so it's not surprising her Twitter was full of lyrics that struck her. But if we take the song lyrics out of it and we look at just the other tweets, there are a few things that stand out. On the day she tweeted about having the stalker, she also tweeted, "This can't be happening, ... and too many lame people live where I live." On the evening of August 18th, again, we have more song lyrics. And then a few hours after that, at around 9:30 at night, she tweeted, quote, "So scared right now." Then less than 15 minutes later, she tweeted, "Every time we talk, I feel sick." The next day she tweeted, "I'd love to love you, baby," and "Yeah, you made a big mistake." Then on the 21st, just days before she was murdered, Hannah tweeted more song lyrics, this time from U2. This is from their song One, and it was, "Did I ask too much, more than a lot? You gave me nothing, now it's all I've got." After that, she tweeted, "I miss you, boy, and TBH, you're all that I want." The next night, around 7:30, she tweeted, "I need to move out of these dang apartments." Then she tweeted about U2 again, and then a few minutes after that, she tweeted, "I'm getting fat, I have a little tummy now, ugh." And her last tweet of the night was, "It takes one step at a time." The following day, around 3:30 p.m. on August 23rd, Hannah replied to someone who was replying to her tweet about getting fat. It just said, yes, ma'am." It was the last tweet she ever sent. The tweet Hannah replied to is no longer available since the user, who was a friend of hers, either went inactive or deleted the account, and the handle was reassigned to a new user in 2018. Hannah's friends saw her tweets when she made them, but they didn't take them that seriously, and I can understand that. They really don't look any different than what teenagers post, but of course, people looking back are wishing they asked more questions, like what she meant when she posted about having a stalker or about being scared. Jeff said that Hannah didn't make any comments about being scared or that she was in danger or in trouble when he had last seen her, and she also didn't mention it to that social worker. But Hannah would hardly be the first 16-year-old who didn't tell the adults around her everything going on. The Hall County Sheriff's Department still chased down these leads to try to find out what Hannah was talking about. There were people who knew more context as to what was going on with Hannah that summer, and the police found that this was mostly a teenager venting on the internet. They still followed up on all of it, and most people were willing to talk with them. Not all, but some even took polygraphs. The sheriff's department was working on this case around the clock, having brought in the GBI for assistance. They had multiple agents and analysts interviewing people and going through all of the evidence. Within a month, they had narrowed their investigation in on a few persons of interest. They also released the description of a car that had been seen in the complex on the evening of the 23rd. According to investigators, Hannah was seen near it. It was a light silver, late 90s, early 2000s 4-door sedan, possibly a Chevy or a Dodge. There was substantial damage to the front, and the driver's door had been replaced but not painted to match the rest of the car. It was lighter than the rest, so it was either white or a very light silver or gray. One witness saw a man in his late teens or early 20s get out of the back seat of the car and walk towards the tree line. He was out of sight for about 10 or 15 minutes when the witness saw him walk back up towards the parking lot with Hannah behind him. She was far enough behind him that it didn't seem like she was walking with him, but rather following him. They then walked out of sight towards the woods where Hannah would later be found. However, the witness puts this as happening an hour before Hannah had last been seen. It's believed there were likely 3 people in the car based on witness statements, and because they were seen with or near Hannah prior to her death, but not immediately before, the police do believe they may have some information and are potential witnesses. When the investigators released the information on the car, they said it may have been repaired after Hannah's murder. But as far as we know, they have not linked the vehicle with anyone. In spite of this investigative work and several pleas for information, nothing seemed to pan out. The tweets, while they helped get media attention and interest on the case, didn't lead to a solid suspect. In February of 2013, a reward was announced in the case, and the police said they still have not found the silver car. Mona spoke publicly and said that they have been living a nightmare and continue to suffer daily. She asked people to come forward with tips and appealed specifically to other parents, saying that any mother could understand her pain and that people should come forward even if the information they have is about their own child. She said the person who did this won't be able to come to grips with it until they were truthful. I think it's easy to read between the lines of the statement and say that the police were looking at someone close to Hannah, probably another teenager or maybe even more than one. Mona was speaking directly to their parents, saying, "Don't cover for your kid." We don't really need to read between the lines of Mona's statements, though, because the lead investigator has since come out and said straight that they do believe Hannah's killer is someone she knew, and the people Hannah knew were mostly other teenagers. The investigators are not just open to the possibility that more than one person was there that night, they think it's likely. The hope is that someone who was there, someone who didn't hold the knife and maybe didn't even know what was going to happen, will come forward and bring answers to the family. Though the investigation continued, by August 2013, 1 year after Hannah's death, the police issued a statement saying that the tips had pretty much stopped coming in and they had not found the silver car. This was repeated in February of 2015 when the investigators said several people had been cleared of involvement and they were still looking for the silver vehicle. They hoped someone on the periphery of the crime would come forward. Around 2016, investigators went back over all the evidence using advances in technology, but whatever was found has not been released. Hannah's case mostly just got anniversary coverage after that point, and weeks before the 8th anniversary in August 2020, Hannah's mother Mona died at the age of 56, not having seen justice for her only daughter. At the end of that month, the lead investigator, Dan Franklin, spoke with the Gainesville Times about the case. He said there is a prime suspect, going as far as to say that they know who did this, but that there isn't enough evidence just yet for an arrest. He said he was confident in the suspect and that he had been on the radar from the start. Franklin clarified that by saying they don't have enough evidence wasn't the same as saying that they didn't have any evidence. They did, but they needed more. All we've been told officially is that the suspect is a male known to Hannah, and he has been interviewed twice, denying involvement. Names have definitely circulated around the high school, around town, and on social media. But I haven't seen the police even hint in the direction of any of the people who have been named on social media or really in any other direction. They walk a very thin line between keeping the public and the media interested in the case while still staying tight-lipped on most of the details in order to preserve the integrity of the investigation. It seems that short of a confession, a witness who knows something coming forward, or big jumps in DNA technology, there isn't, at this time, much more the investigators can do. They haven't lost hope or given up, but rather have just continued to try to push people to come forward with the information they have. And if you are someone who does have information, you can call the Hall County tip line at 770-503-3232 or the GBI tip line at 800-597-8477 and get this weight off of your chest. You can bring answers to Hannah's family.
With everything you have on your plate, earning your degree online seems impossible. But at Grand Canyon University, we specialize in helping you fit a master's degree in business into your busy day. Your graduation team, led by your own GCU counselor, provides you with the personal support you need to succeed. Achieve your goals with a plan and team behind you. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Visit gcu.edu.